Hey everyone, this is MusicTechHelpGuy, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to start making music now using loops from Logic's Apple Loops library. Even though we haven't learned about MIDI recording or recording audio with a microphone yet, you can still produce instrumental tracks by piecing together loops in a creative way. Building a song or beat with loops is a great first step to familiarize yourself with Logic's interface, arrangement functions, and some basic editing functions. The demo project I create with loops in this video is available in the video description below as a free download. But before we get into this tutorial, I want to quickly tell you about the sponsor for this video, Boombox. Boombox.io is a really cool new service for audio and music professionals looking to collaborate with other musicians, producers, or mixing clients. With Boombox, you can batch upload your mixes, stems, multi-tracks, or rough musical ideas, invite collaborators to your project, and receive detailed production feedback on your tracks. All of the feedback is time-stamped, so you can easily pinpoint the exact locations in a track where you need to make changes. If you're ready to give Dropbox the boot, head over to boombox.io, sign up for a free account, and it comes with 10 gigabytes of free storage. Okay, so remember you can pull up the loop browser by pressing O. This toggles it to hide and show it. And when working with loops, I highly recommend that you select the key of the song that you want to work with first, at least major or minor. And you can do that from the display. Just make sure you're in Beats and Project view. And then right here, you can click and select a key. Now, by default, the starting key is C major, but you can choose any major or minor key. Now, I don't expect you to just know exactly what key you want to be in from the get-go, but you probably have an idea of whether you want the composition to be more major and happy and bright and cheerful in nature, or more sad or serious in nature, which would be minor. So I recommend at least choosing major or minor at this point, and you can always change and transpose the tonic note, the root note, I guess, of each one of these keys. So I'm going to go with E minor for this example. And this is important because in the loop browser, you'll see that one of the options that's shown for the loops is the key. Now, this doesn't mean that you can only use loops that are in the key of E in your project, but it does help to identify which loops are going to be closest to the key that you've selected. So when working in the loop browser, one of the first things I do is change the scale or key. It's the same thing, essentially. If you click on this, you can show loops that are in any key, minor keys, major keys, neither, or both. So since I'm working in minor, I'm going to set this to minor. And now it'll only show me minor key loops. If I drag in a loop that was in the key of E major and then drag in another loop that's in E minor, they're absolutely not going to match up and they're not going to sound so great together. However, if you're working with percussion or drum loops, you really don't want major or minor because percussion loops don't really have a key. So you can select neither here, or you can just select any. So I'm going to start with any, and then I'll switch to minor in just a bit. Now, one way to sort the loops is by the loop type. If you click here, you'll see that there are 4 different types of loops. Audio loops, software instrument loops, so these are MIDI loops, pattern loops, these are also MIDI loops, and drummer loops, which are, technically speaking, they're MIDI data as well, but they specifically use the drummer instrument, or you can just select all loops. So if I just want to see audio loops, I can click audio loops, and you can see just the blue icon here for audio loops, or just software instruments, and so forth and so on. So I'm going to select all loops for now. And then you can also sort your loops by instrument, genre, or descriptors. So let's say I'm looking for a nice drum beat to start off with. So I'll select instrument, beats, and then I can scroll through and find a beat that I like. So you can click on the loop to audition or preview the loop, and then you can just click again to stop the loop from playing back. So let's say I want to use these two, this bleep hat topper and blip prowess beat. So all I have to do is just drag the loop into the tracks area, and you just drag it below your lowest track. Let's try that again. There we go. And you'll see that the loop perfectly conforms to a 2, 4, 6, or 8 bar region length. so it matches the tempo of your project. However, the very first loop that you drag in will actually change the tempo. So I actually started off at 120 BPM, but this has bumped us up to 125 to match the tempo of my first loop. So I can go ahead and get rid of my extra software instrument there. And let's bring in that hi-hat topper as well. So I'll just click and drag that in as well on its own track. And let's say that I want to start off with the topper and then I want to bring in the main beat. So I could pull this over to start at bar 3. And then let's say I want to actually loop the loops. There's several different ways you can do this. You can hover over the upper right corner with your main edit tool. And the main edit tool should be here by default. This is the pointer tool. If you hover over the upper right corner of a region, you'll get this little loop symbol. And you can just click and drag out, and it will loop the loop. So this is the original region, and this is a loop of the region. And I could do the same thing down here. Now, if you prefer that the loops are real copies of the loop, that they're just extra regions rather than looped regions, you can drag over these and you can press Control L, and this will convert the loops to regions. This is a function that used to be called convert to real copies. Another way to do this, if you don't want to use the loop function, is you can select a region, and then all you have to do is press Command R to repeat the region. So if I want to press Command R a couple times, I can do that down here as well. And yet another way is to duplicate, as I showed you in a previous video. You just hold Option and then drag the region over, and you can duplicate it. As long as you see that little green plus sign, that means that you are duplicating that region. So let's go ahead and loop this out a few times. There we go. And now let's search for a bass. So now this is where the scale or key is really going to matter, because I'm working with a tonal instrument that actually has a key. With all of these drum loops, there's no key because they're neither major nor minor. So I'm going to select Scale Minor, and this will only show me loops that are in a minor key. I'm going to click the X up here to reset my instrument selection. And this time I'm going to select bass and synthetic bass. And let's scroll through and I'll find a bass line that I like. So you can see that the original key for this loop is D sharp minor. However, my song is in E minor, so they're not in the same key. If you want to audition a loop in the same key as your song, you can just come down here to the bottom of the loop browser and click here. And there's an option that says play in song key or play in original key. So if I play in the song key, this is going to automatically transpose the loop to E minor. If I play in the original key, this will play the loop in its original key of D sharp minor. So that's just a half step lower. If I go back to play in song key, and now we're hearing it in E minor. So now I can just drag this in on its own track, and I can repeat this or loop this as I did the others. Okay, so that doesn't really match too well. Let's see if we can find another one that sounds a bit better. Okay, so I think this break-free synth bass sounds a bit better. Now let's search up some chords or like a synthesizer idea. And this time, instead of using an audio loop, let's use either a software instrument loop or a pattern loop. So I'll select software instrument and pattern loops. I'll click the X button to reset my instrument selection. And I'll search up synths. And let's see what's in here. I like this analog infinity. Let's pull this in. Again, just dragging it down to its own track. Now with MIDI and pattern loops, Logic will have to load up a software instrument for that track. So instead of creating an audio track, it actually creates a software instrument track. Let's see what this sounds like with these other loops in the mix. Now, let's say that I don't want to use this entire loop. Let's say I just want to use half of the loop. There's two ways that I can trim the length of this loop. The first way is you just hover your mouse over the left or right bottom side of the region, and you'll get the trim tool, and you can just trim in, and you can shorten the length of that loop. Another way to do this is to use one of your editing tools. This is called the marquee tool, and this is essentially like a selection tool. It allows you to select regions, and you can select the area of a region that you don't want and just hit delete to delete it. So that's another way to do it, but I think just for now using the trim tool is probably the best option since we haven't really talked about the edit tools yet. Let's go ahead and trim that up, and then I can grab all of this and I can repeat it one more time if I like. Now for this next section though, I don't want to use analog infinity again. I want something else here. So let's see if I can find sort of a keyboard type instrument. And you'll find that certain groups of loops will have the same name, and they tend to work really well together if they have the same name. They're typically going to be made with the same instrument or done in a similar style. So this anthemic keys loop, I'm going to try anthemic keys 2 and 3. So I'll drag number 2 here. And what I'll do is just loop this once, and then I'll press Control L. And then I'll grab anthemic keys 3 and add it here. And once again, I can loop it and hit Control L. So you can hear that even loops that are in the same key may not necessarily work well together. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to search up the word anthemic, and let's see if I can find any other loops that are in this group of anthemic loops. Anthemic. Okay, so there's only anthemic keys, but let's hit the X button. Okay, so if I search for anthem, I find a couple others. Let's see if these synth plucks sound a little better than the anthemic keys I was using. So I'll loop this out once. I'll bring in the synth pluck 2. Let's loop that out as well. Convert these to regions. Let's delete the anthemic keys. So Command delete. Let's see if that fits a bit better. Yeah, I'm going to bring out the bass. I think the bass is what's causing an issue here. And let's bring in this Saturday Anthem synth bass instead. So I feel like the last notes in the bass and plucks really should be the starting point of the loop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab these and I'm going to trim these up right there. And then what I'm going to do is pull all of these over to start right on the bar line there at bar 11. Let's see what that sounds like. Then I can loop this one more time, and then I'll just trim off the end here. Now, if you want to join these all together as a new MIDI region, you can actually drag over these and press J on your keyboard, and this will just join them or consolidate them all together as a new MIDI region. So there's no reason why you can't go in and edit these loops and sort of do your own thing with them and edit them differently than the way they're presented in the loop browser. Now, if I wanted to pull this section over here again, what I could do is drag over all of this and then hold Option and duplicate all of it over here. So let's see what that whole thing sounds like. I was clipping there a bit, so I pulled the volume of all the tracks down. So right here at bar 19, I feel like the beat needs to come up a notch. I need like a snare or a clap beat to sort of accent the 2 and 4 of the beat instead of just having this 4 on the floor kick. So next I'm going to look up snare. There's this 80s power pop snare. I'll pull this in. So I like this heroic synth. I'll pull this in, but I don't think this is going to match up with some of the other ideas I've got going on here already. I'm going to get rid of the synth bass in this section because it doesn't really match the chords. Now, one of the great things about MIDI loops is that you can actually alter the notes within the loop. So, for example, if I'm trying to come up with a bass line that fits these heroic synth chords, I can try duplicating the track by clicking here, or you can press Command D to duplicate. Then I'll just hold Option and drag this down to duplicate it. Double click on it to open it up in the piano roll editor. And really all I need to do here to create a bass line out of these chords is delete all of the notes other than the very bottom note of each chord. This is essentially going to be our bass line. Now what I can do here is I can reassign a new instrument to this that's more of a bass type instrument. So I'm just going to press S to solo that track. I'll open up the library and then I'll go into bass, which is actually going to give me a bunch of different bass guitars. So instead of that, let's do synthesizer, then bass. And let's select one of these basses and see what it sounds like. It looks like I missed one note in there. There it is. So let's delete that. And now let's see what all of those sound like together. So now I've got a beat that I could flesh out into a full musical arrangement with a bit more time. But let's say that I want this to be in a different key than the original key that I selected. Now, without going in and changing a whole bunch of notes, you're not really going to be able to change something from minor over to major. However, you can fairly easily transpose from one minor key over to any other minor key. So I started in E minor, so as I was dragging in all of these loops, Logic is actively changing and transposing the loops to fit the key of E minor. If I just change this over to another key, say like G minor, this isn't automatically going to transpose the loops. Oddly enough, Logic transposes audio loops when you change the key. However, it does not transpose MIDI loops when you change the key. However, you can fairly easily transpose the key manually. So I recommend just keeping this on E minor, just as it was before, and then drag over all of the loops that are actually tonal loops, that are percussion loops. Then find the transpose feature in the region inspector. You can just use the region inspector to transpose up or down by any number of semitones. So if I want to go from E minor to, say, G minor, I'm going to need to go up 3 semitones. So I'll set this to +3. And now all of these are going to be in the key of G minor. And let's say that one of these loops is just in the wrong register, like I want to pull it up a full octave. Well, if you want to pull something up an octave, you're just transposing it by 12 semitones. However, since I've already transposed it by 3 semitones, I really need to transpose this by 15 semitones. So I'm going to double click and type in 15, and now my heroic synth should play up a full octave from where it was before. So that's how you can start building musical arrangements, beats, and songs using loops in Logic Pro. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to see more content like this. As always, thank you so much for the support, and thanks for watching.